Lawmakers is brought to you in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and through the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to Lawmakers. I'm Mark McDonald at the Illinois State Capitol. Between the House and the Senate on the day after the governor's first budget address. Governor Bruce Rauner gave his first budget address this week. There's going to be a lot of discussion about this budget, and we're going to start here today with Senator Andy Menard from Bunker Hill and Representative Rich Brower from Petersburg. Before we go any further, Representative Brower, we've had you in office in your district for what, 13 years?
13 years.
13 years?
Yes.
And you're leaving.
Well, I had an opportunity, and why this has probably been the most rewarding job I've ever had in my life. I think it's time to move on and look for different challenges.
Okay, you're going to stay in politics?
Yes.
You are, okay.
Yes.
You're not making any announcements now because you're waiting for the governor's office to release what you'll be doing?
Yeah, we're going to let them make the announcement, and then I'll be very public again and look forward to participating in the process.
Okay. Before I leave you on that note, this is going to be a tough session, and you're not going to be taking these votes, but it's going to be something to be involved in, isn't it?
Well, there will be a lot of tough votes. There'll be a tough vote on the pensions. But the thing I tell people, do you want part of something or nothing? And I think that's what it's coming down for. We have to look ways that we can make the pensions work for everybody.
Yeah. We might notice we're having a little competition with the audio here, so gentlemen, speak up. There's a rally going on downstairs. Senator Menard, one of the few bright spots in the governor's budget yesterday that he introduced was a $300 million increase for P through 12 public school funding. I know you're very involved in education because you're trying to get the way schools are funded changed in Illinois. What was your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it was a good first step. It coincides with the proposal from the State Board of Education. It dovetails nicely with the work that we've done on Senate Bill 1 and presented a couple weeks ago, calling for increased funding. I would say the governor went another step in the right direction when he said we should drive that money to districts that need it the most. That requires a change in the funding formula. But at the same time, we have to make sure that there's other programs at the state board in his proposal that are contemplated being reduced, that we don't add money here and subtract it there, because at the end that doesn't put school districts ahead. But this is day 2 now of the budget making process, and I think the governor laid out his path, which shouldn't surprise anybody. That's what he campaigned on. That's what he came here to do. Now it's time for the legislature in a bipartisan way to come together and try to solve these problems, because we got a lot of them.
Yeah.
And that's going to take Democrats and Republicans working together.
Before we leave that topic, you actually got some good news this week, because your bill, which passed during the last session and has gone on to the House, has been reconsidered by a number of groups of people. And actually, one of the reconsiderations jived kind of well with yours, didn't it?
Yeah, it's the School Management Alliance, which are principals, superintendents, educators in the state have developed a model under a plan called Vision 2020. Senator Barrickman from Bloomington is introducing that bill, and we're going to work closely together to try to bring these things, to a conclusion that leads the state down a better path than we're on today. It's not competition. I welcome ideas. We need more ideas on the table, and we need more people like Representative Brower. And I hate to see him leave, but he works well with the other side of the aisle, and he advocates for downstate, and that's what we need more of here. And I'm hopeful, whether it's the budget or school funding, that we're going to leave here this spring with solutions on the table. I don't agree with everything the governor had in his budget, nor should I be expected to, or anyone for that matter. But we got to have these conversations, and they're going to be tough, but we got to have them, and we got to get on a better path.
At the same time, we're talking about $300 million more for P through 12 education. We're talking about a 30% decrease in higher education funding. You've got one of those universities in your district, Rich, don't you? Isn't UIS in your district?
Well, the old district, it's not the new district, but I still have a real love for UIS. These things are always evolving, and I think it's unfortunate that the money has to come from someplace. But as you expect a pie in one area, it decreases in another. And so we're always evolving, trying to figure out what's the best use of these funds.
Yeah.
And when you look at the senator's proposal, this is leadership. This is going out This is a proposal. It's on the table. We're going to look at the 2020 vision, and we're going to combine these and hopefully come out with a bill that's workable. Yeah. But it takes leadership to go out there and do something like this.
This is going to be a very healthy debate when it comes to cutting that much out of higher education. Those flagship universities are a matter not only of pride, but they're a matter of great, they're wealthy institutions, and they don't want to give up anything.
Well, nobody wants to give up anything,
no,
and that's just human nature, and I think that's part of the process that we have to go through. I think one thing is clear to me, and it's more clear after yesterday's speech. And by the way, I think the speech of the governor is less important than the process when we get into details of many of his proposals. And that's just our course of business here. And that's what we are expected to do and we ought to do. So we'll sift through these things, but one thing is clear to me, there's got to be balance of revenue and reductions. Mm-hmm. We can't do one or the other. That's the path we've been on for too many years in the state. So I would hope that the proposal as it was given to us, which is a first step, would be considered in full in the Senate, and we'll have a healthy debate, and we'll have our opportunities to weigh in with proposals of our own, and we should bring these things together, and that to me requires bipartisanship and compromise, which I'm prepared to do. And I think that's how we move forward. That's going to be tough, but that's something we have to do.
Mark, let me add this for higher education. The one thing that we've gone away from in the 50s and 60s, the research that was done with higher education was always kind of public information. Now, because of the cost, because the state isn't funding like they used to, it's gone to proprietary information. Mm-hmm. So corporations will go in, they will actually pay for that information, and then they own that information. And the gene mapping of the soybean is a really good example. But it's important that we realize that, and I think it's important that a lot of this information stays public information.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, you mentioned the fact that you think there has to be a combination of new revenues and cuts to programs. The governor didn't mention anything about new revenues yesterday, and House Speaker Michael Madigan called him on it afterwards and said, that's not going to happen. Are you a new revenue guy? Or do you think there's any hunger in the House for new revenue?
I think, and let's just take one program and Medicaid for an example. That was a $7 billion bill. In 5 years, it went to $15.5 billion. In the last 12 years, we've had no sort of investigation on fraud. Now we're going to go back, because we looked at that with the Maxis study, 200,000 cases, 82,000 were scrubbed off the rolls. That's the sort of savings that we have to look at if we want to be successful, if we don't want to raise taxes, if we want to give services. It's a great program, but at the same time, if you don't deserve to be on there, you have no reason to be there.
Andy, give me an example of where new revenues might come from.
Well, I would echo the representative's remarks. We should absolutely make sure that whatever we spend today is spent as efficiently, as productive as possible. Whether it's Medicaid, whether it's school funding, I think we can spend the $7 billion we have devoted today in the state budget for general state aid. I think we can spend it better before we spend more. That's been the thrust of what we've been trying to get done, is spend what we have better, give the people of the state more confidence that we're doing that as a legislature before we go and say, let's raise more revenue. But to answer your question, I think we should put all these things on the table. And we should have that debate in the state of Illinois, which is not what occurred prior to the tax increase that was enacted several years ago. So again, the governor's proposal is step one, and he outlined a budget that is balanced by cutting exclusively. And so now we need to have the debate of how do we take his proposal and say, you know what, maybe we can take these things, but maybe we can't cut universities to that degree, or maybe we can't shift pensions to local school districts for obvious reasons. Maybe we can't cut local government because they're as cash-strapped, many of them, or most of them, as the state is. So let's try to find a balance, and that's what I think we ought to do.
In absence of voting in a new income tax, a new state income tax, what are some options for new revenue?
Well, I think I would go first to loopholes in the tax code, which I think brings about an incredibly difficult conversation, which is let's modernize our tax code in the state that's based on our economy today, not based on our economy in 1970 when the Constitution was put in place. I think we can do that. This is not a question of, can we raise the revenue for state government that we need without being unfriendly to business. I think you can do both, and I think that ought to be the focus of our effort, which is saying, let's look at our tax code, let's scrap what doesn't work, and let's try to put something in place that raises revenue in a reasonable way for state government and is still friendly to business and pro-growth, which is what the governor has outlined.
You both have a lot of state employee retirees in your districts. We're talking about real money now. We're talking about $2.2 billion cut in the budget if we can figure out a new system on how this can be worked. The governor wants to lock in those retirement benefits that employees and downstate teachers already have, but move them to a lower tier where the state's putting in less money next year and the year after and the year after for these retirements. Rich, is that something you could get behind?
Well, and understand what this is. Basically, what the governor is doing, and I want to compliment the governor because he's been part of the process. He gave the state of the state to say the budget on time. He's out here. He's talking with legislators. He's participating. And so what he's basically proposing is that, okay, we're going to keep your pensions the same, and you're actually going to restart, and you're going to be in the second tier. And so there's always questions how the judicial system will view that. And I think that's the big thing that we're going to be looking at almost immediately is that going to pass muster or not?
Yeah. And so in your opinion, it wouldn't necessarily have to go to the courts again. You get a good solid review before you write any legislation, and then maybe you've got a better chance than we did last time.
Well, that's the idea is you put it up there and get the comments back, and as you proceed through the process, then you know if it'll pass muster or not. So. Yeah. Very important.
Yeah, and like I say, Andy, you've got a lot of retirees in your district as well. Now, as an outsider, I don't seem to have any problem with it as long as you don't take away any of the benefits that they've built up over the years. And changing the system now for future earnings wouldn't seem to be a big bellyache to me.
Well, that's been done, and that I think is proven to work. We have a tier 2 today, and I think what the governor's proposing is a tier 2 within the tier 1, if that makes any sense. But I think by the way, I also think it's a good thing the governor gave his budget address on time. Yeah. If you recall, the last 2 years, there was movement on the legislature to give Governor Quinn extra time, and I think I was the only person in the Senate that stood up and said, I don't think that's a good idea. So I think that is a good move. I think the mistake with the pension proposal is front-loading savings and assuming savings next fiscal year. I think that's too rosy of a picture, and it's unrealistic. But we're going to debate that. There's no pension bill filed. There's no pension bill passed. There's no, let alone a court decision. And I think getting that done in one fiscal year, I think, is a little bit too optimistic. And certainly front-loading pension savings for a bill that hasn't been filed, passed, or ruled on by the courts is not something that's going to happen next fiscal year. So I would prefer a more conservative approach and say, let's work on a pension bill that's constitutional. I'm glad that he's come up with concepts. I think that's a step in the right direction. Let's compromise, let's debate, and let's move forward that way.
Here's another of the new governor's ideas. No more Illinois Historic Preservation Agency. Fold those sites into the DCEO program and make a brand new state agency for the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum and Library. Boy, that's going to be a tough one.
Yeah,
what do you think, Rich?
Well, it's all based on funding. And I've heard some proposals about moving it to the federal government. And I don't really want them to give it up. And so I think it's important to look at different solutions. Again, this is a proposal. It's going to be out there. We're going to look at ways that maybe that it can be enhanced. But I think it's important that we do something. And that's one thing that is refreshing is that it's to both sides. I have that opportunity now to participate. And it's been enjoyable.
Yeah. Think any chance that'll fly?
I would be open to all those things. I certainly would be open to making the Presidential Library and Museum a standalone state agency because I think it's that important. So I'm anxious to see those proposals. All those facilities are in the district that I serve, and I would be open to those things.
Gentlemen, thank you. Go ahead, Rich.
Well, it was kind of the same thing with Lincoln's Home. I mean, the state used to run it, and now it's federal. So that's one thing we got to consider is how well it's run now, and is that something that could be done in the future?
Thank you both. Appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure.
And our best to Representative Rich Brower of Petersburg as he leaves the House on Friday, moves on to other things. Lawmakers will be back. Welcome back to Lawmakers. In the governor's budget address this week, one thing that we didn't talk about is what he started out the conversation with, which was the more than $1 billion deficit that the state's going to run this year. He briefly mentioned that Senator Sam McCann from Carlinville, and then went on to talk about the fiscal 2016 budget. But the fact is, we do find ourselves in a very precarious place where some very hard decisions are going to have to be made because we're almost out of this fiscal year, and we're in a big hole.
We definitely are. And there's something that you left out of that layup, and it's nice to be with you, Mark. Thank you for having me today. Something you left out of the layup, and something that was basically left out yesterday, I believe, is that there's also the past due bills. I mean, you put that balance of past due bills that are already in the hopper that date back quite some time, several of them, and really you're up probably over or around $7 or $8 billion if you take the past due bills with the current unfunded liability.
You're not making me feel better.
Well, we want to deliver truth, right? Yeah. That's what it's about. It's about truth. If you don't properly diagnose the disease, you can't properly administer the cure. So we got to diagnose the problem.
Well, we have a governor now who doesn't seem to be afraid to make some cuts in services. But we still have two houses that are in opposition party. How do you see the next 5 months rolling out?
Well, I think first of all, you are correct. Both chambers are controlled by the opposing party, and they have veto-proof majorities in both of those chambers. But then there's also another nuance to the whole paradigm, and that is that Illinois is such a big state, geographically, politically, socially, in all ways, shapes, and form population. So we have 13 million plus people in this big state who see things differently. So many times what happens in the legislature even plays out more regionally than it does politically sometimes. So you add that to the mix and you get a stew with a lot of ingredients.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
But we still have that over $1 billion that we have to we either have to lay people off or just stop providing services, or we have to find some way to plug that.
Well, and again, I think that's why the governor has asked for essentially emergency budget powers so that he can go in as the chief executive officer. And that's sort of how I see our role here in the legislature is we are members of the board of directors. We're sent here by the people to be their eyes, their ears, their voice, and their vote in the Senate and the House. And so the governor's the chief executive officer. We're on the board of directors, and our job is to not work for the governor, but to work with the governor for the people who send us here. And so again, you're right. The governor definitely has some interesting decisions to make over the next few months.
Is there any level of support to give the governor that power?
I definitely believe there is. There's definitely, I think, a certain level of support for that. I mean, we've done it before here in the General Assembly, and I believe there is some support to do that.
So, and for example, if the governor says, and if the legislature if the General Assembly gives him that support, and the governor says there is no way DHS can go through the end of the year this way, we have to lay off 200 or 300 people. That's a possibility.
That is a possibility, and that would be something I would hope that the governor would put around him a group of people that would be advisors that would advise in truth and justice and not just in ideology and politics. And so if something like that were to happen, we would obviously, that's when the General Assembly would start making appointments with the governor's office to talk with him about his decisions.
Okay, this week when the governor gave his budget address, he's trying to find a way to cut about $6 billion out of the next year's budget without raising any revenues. he doesn't seem to be one who wants to raise revenues. Nobody wants to cut $6 billion either, but this is how he sees us going forward. But you seem to think that there might be a crack in there for some new revenues.
Well, just going on what the governor has said himself during the campaign, and I think since he has taken the oath of office, he has at least alluded, if not said directly, that he would be open to service taxes. I think he's mentioned something about the 21st century economy being a service-based economy, especially here in Illinois and across the country, and that even though heretofore we have never taxed services, that's something that the governor seems to be interested in doing. A lot of folks thought he might include that in his speech yesterday as part of his plan. And then I think towards the end of his speech, if I can recall correctly, I think he mentioned that we really need to show the taxpayers that we're going to manage the money properly before we ask them for any more. So he may or may not have been laying up an opportunity in the future.
So if I call a plumber to the house, or if I go get a haircut, or if I need my computer fixed, these services could be taxed at the same level, say, as when I went to buy a car, for instance.
Well, and according to I believe this is what Governor Rauner has said himself, and I'm not sure what all those services are. I think there was a list of 32 that he put out during the campaign. I'm not sure, where he's at on that right now. But yeah, some of those examples probably would.
And you think the Republicans in the Senate would go along with something like that?
I'm not sure. I can't speak for everybody. That's something that I would have to think long and hard about, because again, we've never taxed services.
But you're not opposed to it on the face of it,
I'm not opposed to it. I've said for at least a year now that I am very much interested in participating in the conversation that we need to have. I really do believe, regardless of who controls the legislature, regardless of who sits in the governor's office, it is incumbent upon the executive branch and the legislative branch to work together to come up with the solutions that the people expect. They expect us to do our job, is what it boils down to.
Now, here's a topic that we have been talking about for years, because our pension systems are so screwed up in Illinois. He's got another idea. He wants to take the people who already work for the state of Illinois and have some pension, have some already invested in the system, and lock those in for those folks, but move them to a different tier so the state doesn't spend as much money in the future investing in their retirements. Is that a plan which you see any support for?
What I'm concerned about on that is, and it's what I think many of my colleagues are concerned about, is the constitutionality of it. Now, the governor seems to think, based on his address yesterday, that it would be constitutional. Many of us over here in the legislative branch who have been dealing with this issue for several years now seem to lean more towards the side of that it may not be constitutional, and I certainly have many constituents who say it's not constitutional. I'm a conservative Republican. I'm very, very conservative, and proud to be a Republican, and I believe that the cornerstone of conservatism is the concept of honoring your word. It doesn't matter, regardless of whether it's a business agreement, a social contract, whatever it is. You honor your word. You look for every opportunity to honor your obligation and not run from it because you can. And so I think if you were to look at Senate Bill 2404, that was a part of the 98th General Assembly. I was a co-sponsor on that. It passed the Senate with bipartisan support. The governor at the time said he would sign it if it got to his desk, and there were a lot of votes, a lot of people in the House that said they would vote for it. Speaker Madigan chose not to call it. And Senate Bill 2404 was a compromise. It was government, the unions, and many of the retirees sitting down at the table and coming up with a compromise. And that's the thing about that compromise is that will meet constitutional muster. As a matter of fact, many of us believe the only way to solve the pension issue is through negotiation. That's the only tried and true method that holds up to constitutional challenges.
You've got a lot of pensioners, state pensioners in your district. So you hear from these folks. Now, nobody's saying that anybody wants to take away anything that somebody's already earned. We're talking about moving these employees to a different tier.
Well, and again, I think their argument would be, and I understand that argument, is that the Constitution is very clear that a pension shall not be impaired or diminished. And a lot of these folks say, well, I started out with this was the pension plan. If that had been the pension plan, there wouldn't be a problem. I wouldn't have started out. And let me be very clear. One of the reasons why I'm so supportive of my constituents and other state employees and retirees around the state is that the politicians of the past robbed the pension funds. Quite frankly, if this would have happened in the private sector, the people would probably be going to prison because they stole the pension money. And so two wrongs don't make a right. And so right now, this concept of basically a lot of state employees feel like politicians of the past already robbed the pension fund, and now politicians of the present are trying to take it again. So two wrongs don't make a right. As a conservative, I say let's look for an opportunity to meet our obligations. We've made those obligations. Let's stand up and stand strong for working people, meet those obligations. And again, they've made every payment. Contrary to the popular belief, there's a narrative out there that has people who aren't really at the center of it, maybe non-state employees, non-retirees. They think, well, if you take in what you hear on the news every day or what you hear in the press, you almost get the feeling that the retirees don't contribute anything, or that the average pension is $300,000 or $400,000. Well, the average state pension for a non-teacher is about $29,000 a year, and the employees have never missed a payment. They've been very responsible. They've done what they need to do. They've done what they're supposed to do. We need to do what we're supposed to do. We need it. And if there was no way to honor the obligation, then obviously we would have to have that conversation. But we can honor that obligation, and Senate Bill 2404 is proof positive that we can. They agreed to pay more. Pensioners agreed to skip COLAs, and the state. We sat down at the bargaining table and we agreed with all of this. So it can work. We can negotiate our way out of this.
Now here's a couple of cutting ideas the governor gave this week, and these are steep cuts. We're talking about 50% of the state income tax that goes to municipalities being cut.
Right.
And we're talking about a 30% cut to higher education institutions. That, people would say that's egregious. A lot of people would say that's egregious, and don't just throw them off the cliff, for heaven's sake. If you need to cut them a little at a time. Is that an approach, Sam, that has any future?
I believe that my opinion is this was a start for the governor. I think he threw his proposals out there as a place to start the negotiation process. And, in negotiation, there's that old rule, you always ask for more than what you're willing to settle for. Something tells me he's following that advice. And so when you look at local governments, especially like you look at my downstate district, all our parts of 9 counties in west central Illinois, there are a lot of local governments who would not know what would they do. How would they provide the services that those communities absolutely need and demand when they're going to get a 50% cut essentially overnight?
The governor may have been looking at Naperville, or he may have been looking at a community he's more familiar with that is flush with cash.
Exactly. I have communities in my Senate district. I have communities like Springfield who obviously have a lot of commerce being transacted in it. But I have other communities who literally do not have more than one entity collecting sales tax and collecting any form of a way of collecting dollars to take care of essential services. So yeah, it would be catastrophic to some of those communities.
I have time for one more question. Do you sense a different atmosphere, a different feeling, a different energy around here?
Definitely. Yeah, I think I've said that maybe even on your program, if not to other folks from the press over the last couple of months. There definitely is a different energy around here. Sometimes that energy seems extraordinarily positive and bipartisan. After a day like yesterday, I think sometimes the energy got a little, well, we don't even know what to expect because we don't have too many details. This budget, what we've gotten so far are broad brush strokes, and we haven't gotten any real detail. But the energy is definitely different. And I'm looking forward to moving into this next chapter of Illinois history, being a part of creating it, and hopefully doing some good.
Senator Sam McCann, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, good luck this session.
Thank you.
All right. And as this budget process plays out, it's only just beginning. For fiscal year 2016, we'll be bringing you some of those reports. With another Lawmakers, I'm Mark McDonald. Thanks for watching.
Lawmakers is brought to you in part by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and through the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.